Hey there, guys. Thanks for joining me and welcome to another Holy Shed. Actually, it's Holy Shed number 246 today, which means I've been sitting in here for a long time now, but it's always great to have you join me. And this is our third Holy Shed, which is focusing on themes from my book, my first book, The Post-Evangelical, which, and I can't believe I'm saying this, is actually 30 years old this year. And do you know what? Having not read it properly for about 30 years, I have to say it's not bad, really. I mean, some of it is certainly dated, and my writing style, I hope anyway, has evolved and changed. I'm a little bit snappier these days. But you know what? Much of the content still holds, which I'm very, very pleased about. And that's why we can be looking at it again now. And do you know, I'm finding it fascinating to read the book, not just through the window of 30 years of history, but also through the lens of what's happening in the world right now, in particular with Donald Trump only being returned to the White House with the help and the support of millions of white evangelical Christians. Still can't believe that. But you know, these people didn't just happen to vote for Trump. They mainly elected him as a result of their Christian faith as they understood it. And we'll, do more about that in the weeks that lie ahead. But today, we're reflecting on chapter 4, entitled Longing to Grow. You know, it's often recognized that evangelicalism is a doorway into Christian faith for a lot of people. No great surprise there. It is, after all, by very definition, a proselytizing movement. But it's also clear that evangelicalism has a revolving door, that yes, many people do come in that way, but quite a lot also leave. They flee the fold, either finding their way into a different kind of Christianity, or in some cases, many cases actually, dumping their faith altogether. And actually, that was a major reason for me writing the book in the first place, because I was coming across so many people on the fringes of faith who were just sort of hanging on by their fingertips, or others who'd abandoned faith because, well, in my opinion, they lacked an alternative way to interpret and understand Christianity. They thought this is the only way, and that's something about evangelicalism, that it does have this sense of we and we only have the way, this is the truth. That when people are disaffected by it, they often don't even consider the possibility of looking in other directions. The post-evangelical impulse, as I call it, was, and I think still is, driven by a longing for space in which to grow, to doubt, to question, to explore faith beyond the evangelical certitudes, which they find to be too absolutist, too literalistic, too limiting. They want room to question and doubt without being judged, corrected, or treated like backsliders or heretics. Excuse me. In my book, I use two psychological frameworks with which to think about the whole business of personal and spiritual development. The first is the 4 stages of spiritual growth outlined by M. Scott Peck in his book, The Different Drum. And, as a psychotherapist, Peck noticed over the years that some people would enter the therapeutic process as strong religious believers and end up becoming agnostics or even atheists, while others entered as atheists and skeptics and yet found spirituality in their lives and became, in some cases, believers in the process. And this puzzled Peck. Same therapist, same process, with very different outcomes, until he realized that people are not all in the same place. Okay? Growth can mean different things to different people depending on where you are. So an apparent loss of faith may in fact be simply the setting aside of inherited assumptions that haven't been examined properly and now no longer make sense. And whilst this can appear to other people as something negative, it may in fact be a very positive step toward finding an authentic faith. But for others who come into the process or come approach faith, in a skeptical way, growth and development for them may mean learning to open themselves up to the possibility of something beyond their own world of reason and rationality, to some spiritual reality which they'd never really considered. So Scott Peck's 4 stages of growth are a bit like this. Stage 1, and they're all double-barreled names. Stage 1 he calls chaotic antisocial. Stage 2 is formal institutional. Stage 3 is skeptical individualist. And then stage 4 he calls mystic communal. Well, the first stage, chaotic antisocial, he says is the natural state of all children as they discover who they are and find their place in the world. Then naturally, it's all about them. But Peck argues that 20% of adults actually never really outgrow that first stage. And as adults, it turns into, what can be quite disruptive and damaging self-obsession, narcissism even. They're irritating big kids. Or if they become president, well, something a whole lot worse than irritating. Stage 2, the formal institutional stage, is when we learn to fit in, to conform, to accept the status quo. And this is part of growing up in a natural order of things. It's a healthy stage that we all have to go through. But it's a stage which can become repressive and restrictive if we get stuck in convention and conformism and don't discover our own individuality in a fuller way. And tellingly, Scott Peck observes that most religious believers and churchgoers are at stage 2 of their development, especially with regard to their Christian faith. And so this becomes their fortress, the Christian faith. They become defensive of anything that attacks or threatens or feels like it does the fixed views and traditions which they accept virtually uncritically. And there's a whole culture that kind of supports that and reinforces that sense of conformity. In this stage 2, religious people mostly prefer to think about God as the great one, transcendent, and they struggle with notions of divine immanency, the sense of God being present in material things. And despite a belief that God is loving, the undergirding vision of God in this mode is of a God of judgment. So God becomes a benevolent judge, or a cop in the sky, as Scott Peck puts it. Because at stage 2, faith needs to have borders. It needs to have strong rules and strong governance. And so we need this great almighty God who is controlling everything, even though lots of stuff seems to suggest that that's not how it is. Part of the appeal of this, part of the appeal of stage 2, is that it offers refuge from perceived chaos. Black and white explanations for difficult and messy situations is something that's quite appealing. In a muddled and morally perplexing world, unambiguous right and wrong answers appear attractive, especially when they are handed to us through the authority of the Bible. And, similarly to this, in the political arena, what we need is a strong leader, seems to be a watchword. We certainly saw that in America, we see it there, but also in other parts of the world too. People feel the need of a champion who can quell the chaos, make us safe, seemingly regardless of who that individual is in themselves, their character or their empathy deficiency. Stage 3 in Scott Peck's system, skeptical individualist, is when all of that stuff, the absolutes and certainties at stage 2, begin to unravel. And, it may begin with a few little doubts and questions, some puzzling anomalies, but before long, it can become a landslide with no way back to the former place. Once the naive assumptions are overturned, there's not really any way for them to be restored. They've been seen for what they are. Their authority is undermined and removed, which can prompt nostalgia for level 2 certainties. But of course, that is no way to go. Stage 3 is essentially the basis of the 18th century Enlightenment. When people dared to disregard the centuries-old authority of the church and begin to think for themselves about issues of faith, to want to read the Bible and come up with their own conclusions and interpretations. And this openness, this shedding of the authoritarianism of the church became the basis and the foundation of the modern world, where openness and free thinking was able to flourish, and where religion desperately needed to evolve and be reformed. But that's a process I think that the church still struggles to accept and wants to hark back to the certitudes of a bygone era. And there are evangelical influences around Donald Trump committed to restoring their brand of theocracy or Christian nationalism, in which their brand of religion is imposed upon the rest of society. And that's part of the struggle that we're seeing going on right now. I mean, I'll be honest, what I fear in the world at this present time is a marriage between wealthy, egotistical oligarchs and a president who appears to have almost nil emotional or spiritual intelligence, but uses religion to his own ends, and also a controlling evangelical elite set on opposing progressive trends, which they call woke, whether in the church or in wider society. And their intention is to impose their warped theocratic vision of making America Christian and therefore great again. Look, there are no easy answers to many problems in the world, like the global refugee crisis. And I get it when people feel overwhelmed by incomers. But we do need to bear in mind that indigenous American Indians have felt that for a long time now. But when politicians and powerful oligarchs demonize the misery of millions of people, playing into the fear of often very decent folk who feel threatened and overwhelmed, they create a sense of mounting chaos, which is a ploy to encapsulate concerned people, often good people, within a stage 2 mentality of acceptance and conformity. It's a classic strategy of the powerful that comes in many different forms. My main concern in this context, though, is this religious underpinning, which I see as actually not an expression of real evangelicalism, but a betrayal of what evangelical faith historically has been about, and in fact a betrayal of every authentic kind of religious faith. It's a time, I think, for all, if we use this language, stage 3 type critical thinkers, religious or otherwise, to muster their courage, to be brave and stand and be counted in resisting dehumanizing forces, which I certainly see in the world, that play on people's fears of chaos. But there's a fourth stage in Peck's system, the mystic communal level of growth, which never abandons stage 3. The critical element always remains, but it transcends that. It broadens out from that. And so this is where we learn to open ourselves up to the mysterious, not necessarily not the irrational, but the non-rational, the divine dimension. And it's here that we can discover communion with God, not as some sort of a patriarch up in the sky, but a God who is present in all things in all people, in the whole of creation. So this is where we acknowledge divinity, as I say, present in all things, and pursue the dignity and the inherent value of all people, whatever their background, wherever they're coming from. Stage 4 is important, very important, and it's something that we will come back to a little bit further down the road. But in essence, I think what he's describing is what Jesus practiced and taught as the kingdom of God, the world as God would have it to be. But another important question that I raised in the Post-Evangelical is why it is that Christians who may be highly educated and work in areas of life where stage 3 critical thinking is the norm, is commonplace, yet who seem to abandon this, hang all this up on the peg outside of church, and enter a world of faith in which they revert and conform to simplistic notions and ideas about God and faith that really don't stack up in a modern world. And so they live in a split reality of a critical secular life on the one hand, and on the other, uncritical theological certainties. Since the stages of growth didn't answer this problem, you just had the stages progressing through. So in order to grapple with that, I turned for insight in the Post-Evangelical to something else called transactional analysis. And if you want to read more about this, because I can't explain it all now, you can find my thoughts about it in chapter 4 of the book. But in essence, TA, as it's called, transactional analysis, focuses on the way that we behave and respond differently in different situations or with different people, okay? So it's no longer a case of you're at this level of growth, but we move around depending on the situation and the dynamics of situations and people that we're interacting with. So TA identifies 3 modes of reaction and behavior, which look like this. It calls them parent, adult, and child. And you'll notice, the terms are capitalized to indicate that they are being used in a technical sense within this framework rather than in their everyday usage. And there are many permutations of how we might respond or react in these different modes, and some of those are indicated in this diagram with the different arrows between them. I suspect, that we all know what it is to have a child reaction, maybe feeling fear or shame or irrational compliance as adults or as grown-ups, when we encounter authority figures. I mean, it could be a policeman, it could be teachers, it could be clergy, it could even be our actual parents. There are lots of people who fly the nest and go and build a life for themselves and have their own families and their own responsibilities and everything, and they're fully functioning sort of grown-up people. But when they go back into the home or back into the realm of their parents, there's suddenly this kind of reverting back to a more childlike response. We pull back into ourselves, stay quiet, conform, or whatever. We may also know what it is to be parental. When we behave in a superior fashion to another person, we become overbearing, critical, maybe use the language of shoulds and oughts and verbal put-downs. It is a form of coercion, really, though not necessarily intended, but it is a form of coercion. But the mature way of behaving that's signalled in transactional analysis is when we connect with others in an adult-to-adult mode, when we listen properly to the other person, when we respect their views or their positions even when we don't agree with them. But we also hold firmly to our own views as well. So there's a kind of mutuality about that relationship. From a TA perspective, each of these reactions is in some kind of way an emotional throwback to earlier experiences that sort of replay once we find ourselves in a similar situation. But the key insight from transactional analysis is that we tend to shift between these modes depending on who we're interacting with. So when someone treats me in a parental way, well, I have a choice then to try to outparent them, to sort of, it's a path of certain conflict to just do the same back. Or I may switch to a child mode and become compliant, even if I'm rebellious on the inside. Or I can respond as an adult, not cowering or fighting, but remaining calm and centered and respectful, whilst also, as I say, standing up confidently for who I am and for what I believe. Now, this is obviously a massive subject with books and books written on it. But my point here is that all too often, religion itself adopts or is conveyed or pervaded in a parental way, prompting otherwise very grown-up adults to become compliant children. In many ways, church, I think, is a parental, social and psychological context. God is often portrayed as this patriarchal father to be obeyed. The Bible, God's word, is true on every level and inerrant and must therefore be complied with without any argument or attempt to water it down or whatever. Leadership is often parental. There's a facetious but telling phrase in Catholic and Anglo-Catholic circles. It says, "Father knows best." And it's usually said with a bit of a grin. But as I say, I think it is telling. And it's not far from, similar attitudes in Protestant churches and the notion of leadership there too, where leaders are kind of put on a pedestal and expected to be treated with kind of obedience or compliance or whatever. Ecclesiastical or theological or biblical parentalism basically have the effect of keeping people in a religious child mode. To me, real Christian faith, based on the model of Jesus, isn't like that. It's empowering. It nurtures mutuality. It leads to spiritual and personal maturity. And would that there were a lot more of that around. Hope you're getting the hang of what I'm saying. We need churches, communities, societies, relationships and forms of faith that are liberating, empowering and healing, not limiting and containing us within little bubbles. What I tried to do in the Post-Evangelical, what my whole life and work is about, is really trying to enable and empower people to live as adults in the transactional analysis sense. And from my perspective, this is all rooted in a theology of kindness, justice, compassion, and the essential dignity of every single human being. We need to discover the God within us, because I believe that the God within us never undermines, never puts us down, always respects the integrity of creation, provides us with a foundation of self-worth that can enable us, should we choose, to treat other people as adults, also created in God's image and worthy of love and respect. I want to live in this kind of world, don't you? I want to live in a world where church is a truly open, empowering society, to enable people to keep on loving, even in the face of difference and dissent, to stand up for what they believe, even if it runs counter to prevailing church ideas and doctrines, to know that they're worth no more but no less than anyone else. I want to live in this world. I want to live in a world where politics are for the empowering of each person, where leadership is based on service and integrity, not power or manipulation, where justice is available to all, especially the vulnerable, where we work together to find solutions to these very complex problems like migration, where kindness is a guiding principle in all social and political policy making. That's a world I want to live in. I'll say it again, I'm looking for grown-up religion in a grown-up world. Is that a pipe dream? Maybe. But if we all lean in that direction, the world and the church can only be better than it is at the moment. So there it is for now, my friends. Next time we'll be focusing on chapter 5 of the Post-Evangelical, talking about why I don't really mind being dubbed a woolly liberal, but why that isn't the best way to describe who I am or what I'm about. And so we'll look at some of the themes connected to that next time. And if you've got any questions about anything that I'm saying, please do message me, text me, whatever, and I will try to address those. Meanwhile, here is a prayer. Excuse me. This is a prayer about something very important, I think. How to befriend ourselves, which goes to the heart of much of what I have been saying here. God, who is the source of all goodness, when we look around the world, we find you everywhere. In a humble kindness from a stranger, in the compassionate dedication of health workers in the NHS, in milky sunshine over a city park, a promise that sometime soon clouds will open up again, in the quilt of darkness that holds us in our sleep. But most of all, we find you in the patience and resilience of those who will not let us go, even when we despair of ourselves. May our inner eye, that oftentimes is our harshest critic, learn to look kindly on the soul within. May we realize that you are not elsewhere, far away, but enfleshed within our very being, in the fabric of who we are, in the quivering frailty of our sometimes broken humanity, in the inward beauty that often we find it so hard to acknowledge or affirm. God of all goodness, help us to become our own best friend. Amen. Well, I'll drink to that. If you've got a drink, join me. Here's a toast to befriending ourselves, to finding God within ourselves, to finding the strength and the affirmation to be strong in a world where often the forces are dehumanizing and undermining. So it's to a life that's full and free, to life l'chaim. So, if you like what I'm doing here in the Holy Shed, you can support us. You can buy us a coffee. You just need to go to my coffee site. A link is on the screen and also on the posts that I put up. So, we are very grateful to everyone who supports us in this way and in other ways too. It's much appreciated. Just a couple of little notices. One is that I mentioned last week that I was launching an audio podcast version of the Holy Shed. There are now 2 of those posted on the SoundCloud, and you can get them on Apple or wherever as well. And I'm grateful for all the encouraging comments that have been coming back to me about that as a next phase forward for the Holy Shed. And do please put likes on wherever you see them, because it always helps to get more attention. The other thing is to say that this week on Thursday, I'm leading a soul space, a Zoom soul space, on the subject, not of that at all, but on this subject of a new day always dawns. Especially at this time of the year, it's easy to sort of lose sight of what it means to live in sunshine and springtime. Darkness seems to be all around, and it can sometimes feel like that on the inside too. But a new day always dawns. So it's all very much in keeping with things that we've been thinking about today. If you can join me for that 7 o'clock on Thursday, that would be great. And I will be posting a link during the week. So there we are. Thank you very much for being here with me today. And, I hope that you have a great week. Remember to be kind to people around. That is such a transforming thing that we can all do. Be kind to the world, be kind to yourselves, most of all. And I'll see you soon. Okie dokie. Bye now.